Well, welcome to Farabi Future Forum, Ameya. Thank you for joining us
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
anytime.
Nice
If
to
you
see
don't
you.
mind, if you can give us a little bit on your background, the highlights that you feel like our listeners would love to hear from you.
Absolutely. So I'm Ameya, and I am originally from India, but I came to the US almost 25 years ago to study my master's. And right after completing my master's, I joined Expedia as an analyst. I stayed with Expedia for a little over 14 years, got the amazing opportunity to work on very interesting projects, to grow in my career, take on additional responsibilities, just learn the business, the environment. And along the way, I realized I really like being in the data environment. But after 14 years at Expedia, I thought maybe I should try something else. And that's when I joined the Discovery Channel, which is now Warner Brothers Discovery, when Discovery was about a year out from launching its streaming services. So I was team member number one for the advanced data science and analytics team. I built the team from ground up, did a bunch of amazing things there. And when in 2023, I decided to take a little bit of a career break, then join a startup, try my hands over there, and that's pretty much my story so far. So yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Like you mentioned something very interesting, which is the idea that you were like employee number one regarding analytics and data science on the Warner Brothers side. And mainly, I believe, Ameya, it was like also part of the role was the architecture side of it.
No, that is absolutely right. And I was employee number one for the advanced analytics team for the newly created, like the direct to consumer business. So when I joined Discovery, the direct to consumer business did not even exist. There was the traditional linear side, and that was about it. So this was a very newly formed organization. We had a couple of senior leaders in there, and I think I was, don't quote me on this, but probably in the first 10, 15 employees in that office for the direct to consumer business.
And that, so in other words, there was like an architecture and a team blank slate. So when you're handed such a blank slate, like what do you do first? Like, is it
Wow.
whiteboarding, a couple of shots of espresso? How do you tackle that?
All of the above. But the most important thing that I felt was even right jumping into whiteboarding and trying to figure out what it is. It was mainly talking with the leaders in the organization to understand what the plans are. You don't want to boil the ocean. You don't want to build something which is so far from what your go to market strategy or go to market plan was. So, really trying to understand what the idea is, what the launch plans are, what are the expectations, what are we planning to do, right? And it became very apparent that the first thing we wanted to do was post-launch was support all launch activities. There's a lot of frenzy, there's a lot of activity during the initial stages. So you want to make sure that your instrumentation, your signals that you want to capture for the first day of the launch, because people want to know on day of the launch by hour how many people have subscribed, how many people are watching, how many people are, what are they watching. These are all questions nobody is going to care about 3 months down the line, or a lot less people are going to care about 3 months down the line, right? So identifying and compartmentalizing and understanding what we need to build for the first phase, the middle phase, and then post stability. How do we build an environment that can scale us to do a lot more rapid or a lot more things rapidly and drive more value to the organization? So that literally was, before even jumping into the architecture, was understanding that portion. And uh, there was a lot of learnings in that. Like one of the early learnings was coming from Expedia, which is like a very technology oriented company. Media entertainment was quite different. There's a lot more creative element to it. So selling your idea about data and analytics and advanced analytics took a little bit longer than I had thought initially. But that's what was the learning experience, that yeah, I cannot make a lot of assumptions, assuming that, hey, just because I knew this and the leadership and the stakeholders expected data and analytics to be in a certain kind for Expedia, I can't expect the same to be here. The approach, the hand holding, the ability to help them realize what we are doing, why we are doing, what are the benefits, what are the trade offs was a lot more real. And navigating through that was something different.
It's actually on point because I had a question regarding like a creative driven industry, and now you're coming with data with your insights and your numbers. How do you balance where data doesn't become the villain in such environment? because everybody has an ask, but at the same time, I'm sure there's like conflicts and demands everywhere.
That is absolutely right. And again, right, with and due credit to a lot of people who've been in this industry and know what creativity really looks like, right? Um, to come in and say, hey, we're going to be highly analytical, we're going to be science driven. Or for somebody in technology, that sounds like, oh, that's music to my ears. But you talk to people in creative, they're like, what the hell are you talking about, right? Our content sells everything. Why do we need marketing for,
Yep.
right? But the reality is, it's not about being creative, or it's not about using, getting better with data. It's making sure that you are taking that creative content and putting it in front of the right audience. So think about it in the streaming world, right? When you have a video on demand library of hundreds and thousands of articles or content pieces at hand, and you put all of that in front of your audience, it's going to be overwhelming. You have to figure out a way to like make sure that your audience is seeing the content that matters to them. And I'll give you an example from the Discovery days, right? So Discovery owns a brand called Food Network, and within Food Network they had this Food Network kitchen, which was among the first direct to consumer product to be launched there. They're like hundreds and thousands of recipes by some renowned chef. And just because Bobby Flay's meat recipe is very popular, it doesn't mean that you put that in front of somebody who is a vegan and they're going to like it, right? So if, or you can infer based on customers like clickstream or like what they have seen, you have an idea whether they are inclined towards more vegetarian recipes or meat recipes. And you have to curate and customize and make sure that the content you've created is being put forth and prioritized in front of other content that might be more appealing or less appealing to them, right? So trying to figure that match, that is where data analytics, data science comes into play. How do you personalize the user experience? How do you recommend content that helps the customer drive value of the subscription dollars that they are paying, right? So that is kind of like the balance between being creative to say that, hey, we are not trying to replace creativity. We are trying to make sure that the creative element gets matched to the audience who wants that creative element, and not try to create a mismatch. I think that is the part that was, a journey, so to speak.
Yep.
And on that journey, so you guys started very early. You were started as an individual contributor, and you were part of the driving force that built up what is essentially a data war machine,
Yeah.
Expedia. So a lot of companies are trying to play catch up with the LLMs, with the generative AI sort of got introduced in Q4 2022, and then all the panic set in about, oh my God, we need to integrate all this technology. And what they realized was their data strategy wasn't in place. So they're trying to put sort of the cart before the horse. So, what advice would you have? Because I know when we talked a little bit previously, sometimes the executive leadership sort of isn't listening to the individual contributors, sort of like the canary in the coal mine. The ICs like you many years ago were saying, hey, we need to take this serious. And oftentimes, if the story isn't told properly, the executives won't clearly understand maybe the vision and the direction. So, what advice would you have for companies right now that are sort of still struggling with how do the ICs tell the story, and how do we get the executives to listen?
That's a fantastic point, because you're absolutely right. At an executive level, at a very senior level, people care about the ROI on the investments that they have made. They want to see the impact of the business, and there is a real strong desire to move fast in those areas, because every month, week that you take or something that is delayed is opportunity lost or more cost leakage, or that's not the greatest thing for the business. But the ground reality is, when you talk about data, people think of it as a singular item. And data is not singular. Data is literally a pipeline which has got a starting point, and in my opinion, doesn't have an end point. It can flow whichever way you want. And along the way, the data goes through a journey. That is where the ICs and the principals and the data engineers and the data analysts and the data scientists have real insight into what's happening with your data. It's one thing to build a pipeline. You can have the end-to-end pipeline built from like ingestion all the way to model and execution. But what you're passing through that is bad quality data. Your model, your output is equally going to be that bad. So if you build this whole pipeline and think about building a recommendation algorithm, or if you are not finding out the right quality data, what you're going to end up recommending is content that is, or information that is less relevant to your customer segment. And as a result, you're going to see lower conversion rates, lower engagement. Basically, your bottom line is not going to be that effective. And you're going to see that, right? So it's one thing to say that we've built it, we have it implemented, and it's functional. And it's another thing to say that the information we are passing through it is high quality and actually usable. This is where I feel the ICs play a huge role in ensuring that what we are passing in that pipeline is high quality. From the executive standpoints, the moment you start talking into the details, oh yeah, our R square value is this much, our correlation is this much, you tend to lose the audience for that kind of details. What the executives really want to know, hey, how long this project is going to take? Have we built it? Right? And when they hear, oh yeah, we built the pipeline, they naturally assume, oh, that means it's fully functional and it's fully operative and it can be right away used. That's just one part. The second part is now making sure your data is good quality. You're collecting all the data that you really want. It's not like missing pieces, right? There are multiple signals of users that you need to collect to make sure that you're using it correctly. And all of that is where your ICs play a huge role. And having that communication, and it's not like, ICs have a direct line off into like the executives, there is layers in between. And, when you are filtering and communicating that through layers, in my opinion, there is a loss of translation that happens after each layer of that communication, right? And for the right reasons, these layers exist, because the other a really good effective layer, the middle person knows downstream and upstream, so they can play a good bridging gap. When that is done very effectively, you have a really good communication plan, minimum loss of message of how well that pipeline is working. But when that bridging gap is not efficient, oh, trust me, what gets communicated on level 1 versus what gets communicated at level 5 could be different, and different to the
Totally agree on that, by the way. Totally agree with that, because there's a difference between that middle layer to actually water down the communication and actually make it more high level for the
Yeah.
person at the top. So there's a difference.
Yeah, exactly. But in the end of the day, the problem statements, the risk, the threat has to also not just watered down, but to be realistic as to, if we launch with the data that we have, yes, we will have something in production, we will have a model, but it will not be as efficient, and we need to iterate on that. And nothing is perfect, right? And this is where, over the course of my 20 years of experience, what I've realized is being iterative is a lot more efficient, because you have the ability to continuously improve, versus going into a black hole and saying, okay, I'll come back after 6 months with a perfect model and a perfect pipeline. Yeah, trust me, there's no more patience for 6 months, kind of like go do your own thing and come back after 6 months things. That doesn't exist in today's environment.
I have one follow-up to this. So a great point. And then your point too, Rabea, about the translation. Like, if the translation is no good, even if the IC is translating on their end perfectly, if somebody isn't translating that correctly to the executive layer, it's essentially meaningless. But that brings me to the point about, we talked about, in a previous guest, we talked about the role of technology in the C-suite. So in other words, the strength of a CTO is in, of course, the ability to understand the tech and the vision and the technology solutions and all that, but also the business. So in other words, the expectation is going to be on these technical leaders to also understand the business. So in other words, as these things start to fuse. And one of the things that we see is the engineering leaders and the technical leaders are doing their part in understanding the business, but sometimes the business leaders maybe struggle a little bit to understand the engineering and the technology. My opinion is that it's easier to teach an engineer the business than it is to teach a business person the engineering. And this gets to your point about the communication. How much of the executive layer is going to change or transform in the future, where the data maturity levels are going to have to be at particular levels for an executive, just as much as their ability to understand the technology and engineering. Meaning, our executive layer, I believe, is going to become more technical and more data mature. And that's my opinion on where I think they're going to go. How do you feel about how the C-suite and the executive layers are going to transform in the future, and when it comes to data maturity and technology, especially with the generative AI coming out, where now there's more focus on sort of understanding design and these types of principles? So how do you see the C-suite and the executives in the future in terms of the skills that you're going to need to be an executive in the future and moving forward in a C-suite in the future?
You hit it right on the nail over there, on the head. Having at a senior leadership and executive level, having technical, I mean, we used to always say business acumen is important, right? Now there is the opposite where you say a technical acumen is required, right? Technical knowledge is required because technology has infused in how corporations, how work happens. Even like if you take an HR system, right, which we would expect it to be the least technical, but it's not. You have an entire like ATS, application tracking systems. You have like things where you have your resumes and your cover letters being matched and scored and ranked. That uses significant amount of technology, right? So even in that kind of an environment, you need somebody who knows technology, who can translate and really understand what the system is trying to do, which is up until now was considered non-technology related, but is using technology. So the reach of technology within each department is so high that no matter which discipline you are in, you cannot be removed away from technology. You have to have a certain basic, that's table stakes in my opinion in today's world, right? So for a senior executive or a C-suite person to come in and say, yeah, I've always been on the business side. Yeah, great. It's time to upskill. And just like, engineers and technical people have gone through an evolution of upskilling their technical knowledge, it's the same translation that is applying or is getting applied at across the levels in the organization, where it is literally a requirement today to know, because not just whether you're using it, but the amount of at a C-suite level, the amount of budget you're going to allocate towards technical infrastructure is going to be so huge. You need to know, why is that the right money is to be invested, and why not, or what are the trade-offs, and what are the technical debt you're going to accumulate over time if you don't do that, and is that something that's right for the business at that point in time, right? These are all decisions that leaders will have to make and are making today, and in order to make those calls in the right time, in the right moment, yeah, having that acumen is very, very, very high. I remember a time at Expedia where marketing leaders didn't really have to be very technical in nature, but being in an e-commerce marketplace, it became very imperative that you are using technology for all your marketing bids or reaching your audience. And the more technical you are, the better decisions you're driving in terms of choosing vendors, choosing your marketing operations and things like that. And it became literally people from the technology org started driving more and more marketing initiatives. That is how I've seen that translation and that transformation happen at Expedia in my 14 years there. And I see that happening across the board in different industries.
I wanted to ask a question, Amia, regarding what you mentioned before Ryan's last question about you need to be iterative. Yes, stakeholders are going to understand that there is some results that are going to go to production, go live. You're going to see results, but it has to be iterative where it's always continuously improving. So I wanted to just rewind back to Expedia. Like you led a team of 250 plus people, a huge organization. So and that's a small army, honestly. So how do you keep them impactful and still lean and agile, because it is a challenge.
It is a challenge. And trust me, as the team and as my scope increased at Expedia, it became more and more evident that, we were not operating at the same pace as we were when we were a 50-member team or a 60-member team, right? Things do get slowed down because there's more dependencies, there is more, impact as you do. And it is important to not even break things in the interest of speed. I realized that the way for us to stay true to the speed and the quality of the work that we do is to break this team down into smaller chunks, which are independent and can align themselves with business objectives, with business team members, and then can work to deliver the value, right? So they had kind of like a two-faced responsibility. One was on the business side, align with the business, understand what the business goals are, and then work on creating a solution that actually delivers value to the business. So that's part number one. Their second responsibility was you're essentially part of an engineering, data engineering organization, and your other responsibility is to make sure that the methods, the frameworks you're developing adheres to a certain standard, are replicable and are usable for other team members if they want to use, so that you don't come up with four different frameworks for doing the exact same thing. right? And that is how you get efficiencies and synergies, that you have a responsibility internally to be aligned within your organization. So there is no four different technologies we are using and increasing our technical debt, but then you're also aligned with your business to see, make sure that at the end of the day, what products we are building, what solutions we are building are benefiting the business, and we are measuring it, and we are being impactful and driving value to the organization through that.
I actually wanted to follow up with, have you seen, especially from the data side, data analytics, that the concept of product management useful bridging between the business and data engineers or analytics?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to go so far, but I think I was one among the very early people at Expedia, at least, to identify this concept of data products. And the reason why it came into play is not having data being viewed as a thing, but actually a product. Just like you have product and marketing, a product that is used to drive value, right, to meet our customers, internal and externals, right, to benefit them. And in doing so, I realized that, yeah, you have your data engineers who are building ETLs and pipelines and monitoring your flows, cleaning the data and all those kind of things. You have your business analyst and data scientists building reports. Your data scientists are building like models and algorithms. But there is a lot of coordination that is required between these three things. And then there is the business and your upstream and your downstream dependencies. So there's a lot of coordination that is required. And I realized that sometimes the business analyst used to play the role of being the project manager and coordinating the few
Correct.
things, right? And I realized that no, we actually need to have dedicated data product managers who is going to view the solutions we are building as actual data products. And the way I define the role is, their role is to make sure that they keep the data engineers, the analyst, and the data scientist unblocked at all times, which means they have to identify what is going to be built, right, which is in alignment with the business goals, right? So they are translating business requirements into technical requirements. They are doing minimum level of UAT validation of data, whether we have the system. They're going out and reaching out to people upstream, downstream, sideways, where we have identified dependencies, risks, and highlighting them, and communicating constantly between these groups and upstream and downstream to say, hey, here is the project status. Here is where we are blocked. Here is the challenges we are facing. Here is where we are ahead. Here is where we are behind. To make sure there is visibility, there is good prioritization, and the guys that are actually doing the work, the teams that are actually doing the work, remain unblocked at all times, right? And I felt that was very powerful, to view data as a data product and not just, oh, it's a thing that the company has. It's a great, we have a lot of data. The problem today companies face is not having that they don't have data. You have so much of data, you kind of get lost as to what to do with it and how do we use this data. And not all data is created equal. There are certain data, transactional data, financially is very, very, very important. You need that. You cannot say, oh, we are fine with a little bit loosey-goosey here. No, you're not. But there is clickstream data. There is signals that you can say, oh, we have a 2% loss on this signal. That's perfectly fine. You would not make any different decision. Your model output would not be any different had you had those. So no point boiling the ocean to get that remainder of whatever you're missing, right? So that's where I feel like, having that ability to understand data product managers who knows business, who understands technology, plays a very critical role in making those data product projects, programs successful.
So on the data product manager or product owner. So we have the concept of the product owner.
Yeah.
I think it's an agile concept, and then we have the project manager, which is a traditional sort of, and you use both of these two things. So my question is around product ownership. So road mapping a product. If we're going to say that there's some model or some application or some function that we want to introduce into the business, and then there would be some roadmap attached to it, some vision behind it. Who owns the product from that perspective of the roadmap and the vision? And then how does that live in the data team? Is it the business side? Where does that responsibility lie, and how does that translate into the data as a product, which is absolutely the way the entire industry moves. The entire industry moved, like you were saying, you were very, very early. The entire industry is now seeing data as a product, and most more mature enterprises have your data product teams.
That is absolutely.
Where does that owner live? Is that the responsibility of the business? Or is it somebody that lives in the data team, or is it a combination? Because I think that disconnect right there can sink or swim with a data product. It's like who's really translating these things.
I'll tell you a very interesting personal story. I used to be the data product owner, and I used to be on the business side of things at Expedia, right? What that gave me the opportunity, being a data product owner on the business side, is really understand technology, really understand data engineering aspect a lot more in detail, to the extent that I was asked to come and lead the data engineering team, or to say, hey, you know the business, you know what solutions we need to build, you know the pain points, and now you understand technology as well. Why don't you just take ownership and be the end-to-end owner of everything data? And I was happy to do so. So in my last 5 years, I did both data product ownership as well as the data engineering side. I don't know whether you like this answer or not. I wish I could tell you that there is a clear answer as to, where should the data product ownership lie within the business or on the data engineering team. In my opinion, in my experience, it has resided in both places. I feel whoever has a better vision on serving the goal of making data useful and more powerful, that's where it should lie. If you happen to have that person or that team on the business side who has a vision that, yeah, we need to build this kind of a foundation, who needs to serve not just marketing, but even product and content and retail, great, let them drive that vision. On the other side, if you have somebody who's technical, who is in the engineering side, but knows the kind of foundation they need to build and can outline the vision to say, hey, here is how we can shape the organization and serve 5 different use cases with this vision and with this data product frameworks, I don't think that there should be any hesitancy in taking that approach either. At the end of the day, right, we want to be able to, and any company wants to make sure that the data that they're collecting, that they're spending money in housing, using, computing, all of those things, has found the maximum use and is infused in decision making, right? And if somebody on the engineering side is driving that, great. If somebody's on the business side feels they have a stronger vision to drive that, that's perfectly fine too. I don't think why it has to be one or the other.
So,
It's a very
right,
fluid,
correct. So it's
company based, the maturity of the organization,
context.
context driven.
Right.
Yes, very
So
much.
it's less about where the individual is residing in terms of an org structure and more about precisely the function of that person. So you sort of laid out the attributes of the person. The person should have these attributes, and where they live is less important. What's important is they need to have this type of deep business vision and so technical understanding, which is a senior position. This is not a junior level position.
Absolutely not, because that's the foundation you're building. That's kind of like the direction you're asking the company to take. And I'll give you examples like, in a big technology companies like the Metas of the world and the Amazons, it's a very fragmented data environment. Yes, there is a huge team that is dedicated to the infrastructure, but then the analytics and the data science and the data product ownership, a lot resides within individual business units, right? Versus when you look at some of the smaller companies, there is more center of excellences kind of environment where you have a centralized team. Because again, it's context driven, it's business driven, the maturity of the organization to use for decision making, that's how it's driven. It's not to say that one is absolutely right and the other one is absolutely wrong. No, it all depends on how your organization is set up to deliver value. And at the end of the day, as long as you're delivering value, then that's the model that works. And if you can make it more and more efficient, more power to you. I mean, in my time at Expedia, at Discovery, right? Reorgs are a real thing. So it's not to say what works today is going to work 2 years down the line or even 18 months down the line. Because your external environment changes, new things get introduced. You have to realize that yes, the objective remains the same, but the way you operate, the way you are functionally aligned has to iterate and has to evolve over time as well.
So we talked about product ownership and data products, which is awesome. The iterative approach of being agile and always delivering. But if we go a little bit high level, because you sat like at the crossroads of like marketing and finance and tech and product, but like how do you manage these like boardroom dynamics? You have a lot of stakeholders with a lot of KPIs. How does that just tell us about the dynamics of such boardroom?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I think the first dynamic, and again, I've got a few stories I can share with you, has been very interesting over the years. When I was at Expedia at a very early stages, I wouldn't call it boardroom, but we used to have this trading meetings every week. And one of the most interesting thing in those trading meetings was different teams used to have different numbers for the same KPI. I used to go there and scratch my head. I was like, what? How can conversion be defined in two different ways? No, there's only should be only one conversion. That's an idealistic world that you live in, right? But what it really exposed was the fact that we did not have standardization. We did not have a good dictionary where you had alignment across different parts of the organization to define certain metrics, right? And I think today in the boardroom, right, that dynamic is very important. What are the KPIs that really matter to the business at a high level? So again, right, like you have the executives, you have the middle management, you have the low level operations, right? And the metrics that you would look at each level are different and for the right reasons. And to be able to define those is very, very, very critical to be efficient in decision making using data. And I feel that the dynamic today and the things that I have seen work is having a really robust framework to say, hey, we're going to have a weekly business review every week. We are going to have a monthly business review. And these are the metrics we're going to look at. These are the time slices we're going to look at. And people are accountable for answering for their metrics. And there is a person or there is a team that is responsible for producing those metrics, ensuring the validity and the accuracy of that data. And then there's somebody who's responsible for driving the meeting to make sure that it's not just, yeah, we look at the same numbers and there's no output of it, but okay, what are the outcomes of it? We have lessons learned, what is working well that we should continue, what is not working well that somebody needs to look into to figure out what needs to change, right? And coming up with an action plan. That's how I feel a very efficient boardroom or that level of discussions are more efficient and more useful. That's when you see the power of data. If you step into that meeting and everything is gut driven, you don't need any numbers, you don't need any report out of that. But again, based on this, I have seen this work at Discovery, at Expedia. When you have properly defined reports, metrics, KPIs, definitions that are transparent, so there's no confusion as how is conversion defined versus how is click-through rate defined, and so on and so forth. There is much more efficient decision making based on the information you have, rather than a discussion that is more intuitive and more gut driven than anything else.
And on that KPI, on the metrics, on the different layers, especially the executive team layers. So with a small army, as Rabea put it, with a team that size, what were some of the ways that you were able to continuously communicate the impact of the team? So one of the things with data, it's sometimes difficult to communicate the lift or the impact that particular models or particular decision layers are producing. And that's critical to the senior team, of course. And are we moving the needle in any of these areas? And then also for, like you mentioned earlier, was about investments. So in other words, are we going to continue to invest in this direction, or are we going to move in another direction? So what are some of the ways that you were able to continuously demonstrate? And it's not easy. Anyone that's ever ran a data team, or this is difficult to do, and you want to try to do it as robustly as you can, but it's not easy. So what are some of the ways that you were able to sort of try to continuously, iteratively show the impact?
Yeah, I mean, what you're asking here is, trust me, I don't think anybody in the business has ever solved this entirely, right? It's basically, how do you justify the work that your team is doing is driving value continuously, right? And if you take all the projects and say, hey, the lift that we got is entirely because of my team, right? And you add it up, oh, great, you're like in seventh heaven, right? But that's never the case. It's a contribution from multiple teams that leads to a success of any project or even like conversion improvement. There is product team, there is like the site team design, there's engineering teams, all sorts of people are involved in that. And that's what I felt, right? Rather than getting stuck on here is the incremental value that my team delivered, I tend to focus more on here is how my team worked with other teams to deliver something, right? And even if it may not be positive, like an A/B test, right? Most of A/B tests are neutral or negative, and you learn what is not working and you iterate and you then make it positive. Going through that, how fast you find that learning, how fast you're able to iterate and get to a point of being positive. I think that is where we need to make sure that we are, as data leaders, that we are showing the value that what used to take before 3 months to call in a test, if we can reduce that to 2 weeks, amazing. And I'll give you an example at Expedia. I'll just throw some numbers. Don't mean to like overwhelm you, but like when you think about how, at least at the time when I was there, right, the scale at which Expedia used to operate. We had, like, at that point in time, 25 different countries that we used to operate. I mean, this, I'm talking about a very specific brand, not the entire Expedia, but 25 different countries that we used to operate. Just for the sake of simplicity, I'll say 4 different product lines: car, hotels, flights, packages. There were many more, but just for this discussion, let's stick to that 4. So that's like 100, or 25 times 400, 5 different marketing channels. Trust me, there was a lot more than that. That's 500 data points, right, for one metric. And if you just say that in a report you had like 10, now you know how many data points you need to look at. Now think about it. If you want to really know what's happening, working well and not well at each of those couple of thousand data points every single day, it's going to take a lot of time to comb through, somebody manually combing through, right? So we literally use data science to say, hey, we know the trend history of each of those metrics. We know what the seasonality is. We know what the variation is. We can clearly establish like an upper limit and a lower limit. We know the actual data point. And we can, based on the historical trend, what we can predict is what will tomorrow look like and what are the boundaries for tomorrow's this one KPI. And when the actuals come in, because we are the data team processing the data, we have the first eyes into this. If we can compare that with the upper and the lower boundary, and if it's within that range, then business is normal. The moment it goes above or beyond, that's where we need to focus our attention, right? So we kind of developed this like anomaly detection, which was very new at that point in time, because for a lot of different reasons. But we like, let's do management by exception rather than just looking at every single metric at every day. Let's just look at only those that are out of bounds that needs attention, right? So going back to your question, right, what are we really trying to do here with data is really try to figure out where it needs attention and reduce that time. So the value we provided before, so for the weekly trading meetings, we used to send out these reports. Somebody used to take a couple of days, and somebody in Australia would figure out, hey, SEM, paid search, car business in Australia and New Zealand went down. And this communication used to come back to us after a few days of lag. So even before somebody identified a problem and we started looking into it, it was at least a couple of days, right? With this management by exception, what we did is literally cut it down to like a fraction of like minutes, right? Because we are doing this comparison in real time, even before the data goes out. And from 72 to 96 hours to just identify the problem, here is the moment we send it out. Hey, by the way, here is your weekly business review deck, but here is a cover page of the 10 metrics in 5 points of sale that needs attention, that is out of bounds. And by the way, we've notified the teams and they're looking into it. Now you see the cost savings, right? You can't put a dollar value to it right away, but over time, you're going to say, yeah, because of this, we identified 3 things that were doing good and we replicated that across the region. There were 2 things we found out bad and we plugged the hole and stopped the leakage. Right? Yeah, sure, you can justify and you can come up with some numbers around it. But at that point, nobody wants to know what the dollar saving is. People want to know how fast we were able to react and what is the time savings. Everybody knows time is money. You save time, nobody's going to ask you what the dollar amount was.
And this gets to what we discussed a little bit earlier about the data maturity levels of the upstream leadership and their ability to understand the technology to some degree makes all of the communication that you're talking about right now much easier. So if you have a very upstream sort of lower data maturity and they're a little bit not understanding maybe some of the nuance to some of these measurements, it makes all of this more difficult. So you can be providing a lot of impact, planting a lot of seeds for long-term viability, and including short-term incremental returns. But if the data maturity isn't there upstream, it makes it more difficult to communicate the impact of the team. So that ties in what we talked about earlier about the C-suite and the way that they're going to be transforming to be more technologists, more engineering, more data maturity focused in the future.
Yeah, I mean, just the simple fact, right? Data quality is not talked a lot about. Everybody talks about volume of data, right? Now there is quantity and quality, right? You can collect a lot of data and it could be meaningless if it is not high quality. There's just garbage sitting there, right? And trust me, I've been through times where we've given requirements. Hey, this is the signal we want to capture. Again, you as a business or as a engineering team, you give a requirement what the actual engineer codes and captures could be a little different, right? And that can change the whole story, right? And having that ability to test and validate and verify the quality of the data plays a huge role in how the rest of the pipeline performs.
So just going back like to Ryan's question, Amia, like regarding data maturities, like what, in your opinion, will be like the cultural barriers for companies to actually be data driven? We It's a good point from Ryan's on executives that they need to actually find the value first. But yeah, your personal opinion, what will be the cultural barriers?
Speed. I think today people are caught up so much in delivering something fast. I used to always say this, right? There is a quick way of doing things, and then there is a right way of doing things, right? And that applies hugely at Expedia. I mean, anything related to data, right? And at Expedia, we used to do that. We have trade-offs. If you want something implemented quick, yeah, you're going to implement it, but it's going to come at the cost of quality. And as long as that impact is short lived, because there is need to, again, timeliness. Sooner you deliver something, if I can deliver something that is 70-80% good in the shortest amount of time, personally, I will I'll take it and run with it, but I will not stop there. A lot of things, the cultural barrier that that people have to overcome is to say, oh, we've delivered 80%, let's move on to the next thing, right? And in some cases that 80% is good enough, but in a lot of cases that 80% may not be good enough. It might be giving you more false positives, or maybe throwing off the signal a lot more, right? And maybe you need to get to a 95%, but the starting point is 80%. Work towards 95%. Don't lose track of that. That is where I feel people get distracted, that people feel that, hey, I have pressure, I've delivered this, let me move on to the next one, right? So having that maturity as a leader, as an organization for data, to say that this is fluid, we cannot just like make a release and end it there. It's not like a user experience that we launch something, you see it, and that's the end of it. You have to continuously evolve and iterate and make sure it stays at that high level and doesn't regress back. Because again, what the signals that you're capturing is so much more dependent on what's happening on your apps, on your user behavior, and which constantly is evolving in itself. So there is a chance of breakage. Losing visibility into that is a huge thing. To not lose visibility, you have to invest in monitoring and validation, which people feel is often overlooked. And I
An
feel that
afterthought, yeah.
that is where building is easy, maintaining is the tough part. I think that is where the cultural maturity and their understanding is important. I mean, everybody can say, I've gone to the gym today. How regularly have you maintained your schedule? That's the tough part.
Adding to my question, so you mentioned actually a very good examples briefly about forecasting and anomaly detection and all that. So it's all like driven decisions by pattern recognition and seeing what's going to happen next. How does that, as a data leader in the companies that you worked in, I'm sure you had hard calls where like the data was telling you one thing, and then there's the other side of the business, which is guts in politics, and it was against the data and what it's showing you. So how, I guess, what kind of hard calls you had to make as a data leader in such situations? And to be fair, I truly believe that from business perspective, at least from my small experience, guts matter.
Agreed. And personally, as a leader, when I have to choose between data and gut, I go with gut. I mean, in all honesty, there have been instances, and this is the reality of life. I'll give you a couple of examples, right? But there used to be parts when we used to look at the data and everything looks healthy, right? But a market manager would come and say, or, I'm seeing a lot more money being spent in this bidding environment, or something is happening here, right? That just doesn't align with the numbers. You'll be surprised how many times that gut was right. Because again, data is a continuous transformation from upstream to the point when we see something, right? And there is a lot of break points of failure in between. And those points of failures are all real. And when they do, your gut, that this doesn't pass the test. That's why I place a lot of value in what people's experiences and gut tells them. I use that to validate the data. Not to say that it will always be right, but it's always good to validate the gut instincts with data. Right. And I learned this very early on. When I joined Expedia, I joined as an analyst in the call center business. And call center business, at least in 2005, at Expedia, was a lot gut driven and a lot less data driven. right? And for the right reasons. People who are the operations team, call center managers and directors were people with like 20, 30 years of experience. And here I am, fresh out of college, looking at data for the first time and trying to tell them how to run their business, right? That is being naive. What I really learned from those years is people have intense and extensive knowledge of their domain, and you cannot discount that. Yes, you have the data, and we can use to prove and disprove a theory or their intuition, but you cannot just ignore your gut feeling, which is accumulated over years and years of experience. I think
Yep.
it's very important. And I think go with gut, get it validated, right? And improve your data along the way to make sure that it matches the gut.
Yep. Those priors, like you said, baked in after decades of experience, do mean something. And oftentimes they're right, and they certainly add value. So, in other words, it's rare to be in a situation with people that have this much experience that add no value to a new model or a new product. It's always the case. And the politics, like Rabea mentioned, generally comes down to how much. There's always a sort of a tug of war between how much of the priors we're going to introduce versus how much of the data-driven approach. And that politics sometimes can get a little bit tense. But I agree that the priors and that deep domain knowledge is almost required for success, and especially with the generative AI as we move forward, because generative AI, if it works, if it's useful, if we assume that we're able to distill the transformer output into useful business value, it's almost certainly not going to happen without deep domain knowledge, because it's going to enter into every part of the enterprise, and the engineers are simply not going to understand how to distill those distributions, like you mentioned, the 80% and the 95% of where is the threshold where it goes from not useful to useful. And it's going to be different in every domain, and it's not going to be successful without those domain knowledge experts. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of this stuff isn't taking off, is the disconnect between the domain knowledge experts and the engineers. And that gets back to that data maturity. And like you were mentioning, you have to have upstream maturity in your data team in place. And if that disconnect exists now with classical data analytics, it's going to just extend in the generative AI world. So if you don't have those first principle fundamentals in place, your generative AI strategy is just going to highlight that. It's going
At the end of the day, whether it is data analytics, whether it is data science, whether it is generative AI, right? Every solution you build is at the end, bottom of the foundation is some information, some data. And if your foundation is not solid or is incorrect, that's your end result. It's going to be, I mean, you always say, right, your strongest thing in the is as strong as your weakest link, right? That is absolutely true in this case, right? If you do not put emphasis on data governance and data quality, right, doesn't matter whether it's an algorithm, whether it's an LLM output, you're going to just get that. And to the extent, right, like LLMs today, right, your models, your generative AI can be tricked into doing different things. I've seen this kind of like firsthand. You tell the model enough number of times that this is wrong, and it'll believe, yeah, the 2 plus 2 is not 4. We've seen those funny videos, or we've seen those people pointing that out. It's true, because at the end of the day, it's a technology. It runs on a certain set of rules. Those rules are kind of like ambiguous in a lot of cases in case of generative AI, but at the end of it, those are the rules. And if you tweak and you figure out a way to game that rule, you're going to get a very different output.
And I have a question about one last question about sort of this topic, is that you have large companies and small companies, and we talked about the difference in how nimble a smaller company can be compared to a bigger company. Like you mentioned, 50-person team is significantly different than a 250-person team. So with generative AI, and let's make the assumption that generative AI can get distilled into business value with the proper engineering and the proper domain knowledge expertise, and it's work. It's not magic. Is this a technology that a smaller company can now use to sort of close the gap against a bigger company because they're able to maybe move quicker with the piloting and the experiment? Or is it that a bigger company, because they have more resources, they can sort of throw more money at the experimenting and the piloting? Or is it just like you had said, if you have a good foundation in place, big or small, you're going to get a good advantage? Is there any distinction here?
My answer to this is very little. While it does give smaller companies more access to resources and to, so give you an example, right? To build a complex model, if you require to hire a PhD student or a PhD level candidate to build out something extensive, right? In a traditional world, which not necessarily, small companies may have the budget to do it or may not have enough budget to hire many more of those. Generative AI kind of thing kind of like gives you that efficiency, that productivity in place where now you are able to up your productivity to a certain degree, right? And that helps them. Right. Likewise, bigger companies have a lot more resources in terms of even data that they can train models. Instead of one model, they can train 20 different models. And instead of running 5 experiments, they can run 20 experiments, right? That gives them the edge too. So whatever is available to small companies is also available to the big companies. So from that perspective, I don't think that's what there is any distinction between how it is used. Definitely, it boils down to what kind of vision use cases have you identified where you can plug this in and actually drive an impact to the business. What I have seen so far, that piece of the vision is kind of like missing. People are just jumping on the bandwagon. Hey, we need to do something with LLM. What is it that we need to do? We don't know, but we need to incorporate it. It's like the FOMO, right? We don't want to miss out on this train that is coming along and somebody is doing it, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure even Microsoft did not know what to do with, ChatGPT early on, but now they are figuring it out along the way. Oh yeah, they can couple this. Now you can take meeting notes. Now you can do something else, which was not thought early on. But that's kind of like the iterative ways. As long as you can come up with a vision and can find a use case, you will get efficiencies and ROIs on your investment, but you need to have that. I want to do this just because I want to do this right now will only get you that far, right? But in doing so, you're building the foundation, right? And that's where I feel that, yeah, if a company goes in, hey, we want to start doing LLMs because everybody is doing LLMs without actually knowing what our use cases are, you're going to build a foundation which may have to be entirely be reworked after you have come up with your own vision. That's throwaway work, right? And that's the waste. That's where one needs to be mindful, where I feel people are not very realizing that just yet. People feel that they need to do something, they need to deliver something, they need to show they are active in the world of generative AI. So we're going to build something and ship something, whether it is useful, whether it is driving value, whether it is generating positive ROI, is something is not even considered. It's like a startup environment, right? Nobody's talking about profitability. People are talking about how good your product is, right? That's kind of like the mentality that's going on in that tech.
I was just going to mention that I think one of the differences between any previous tech on the data side or data science and machine learning, that generative AI just comes with a lot of education that has to be put in place, because enterprises are looking at it as that I might not even have a product yet, but if I have the right education in place for my employees, I might get a productivity boost. Like when you're thinking about like pattern matching and forecasting, etc., that knowledge can be centralized into your data science team, your machine learning team. Nobody needs to know how it works. But for generative AI, the interesting part, the attractive part, is that now I might be non-tech at all, and I still can get a productivity boost from this. So I think that's the only difference where the panic comes from for the enterprises. It's like,
Yeah,
yes,
agree.
but I agree that vision has to be there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it's just like having every person now has an assistant to be better email writer or be better at drafting emails or doing something that otherwise took you like 2 hours to do. Now it's been distilled down to 15 minutes, right? Because you have somebody who is just doing it for you, right? Definitely, that is real. But if that's your use case and that's what you're wanting, then build the foundation along those lines, right? That is not an actual product you're taking to the market or incorporating within your day-to-day operations, right? That's your
I agree.
productivity boost for your workforce. So again, identifying what is the purpose, just how much time you take writing meeting notes, all right? A lot of executives, we don't have the luxury of having an assistant taking notes all the time. We scribble on notepads and we tend to not even recognize our own handwriting after a while, right? Um, I have seen these AI assistants pretty efficient in not just being a transcribing like a tool, but actually isolating the topics discussed, action items, and things like that, which is meaningful, right? And I think the companies who's building that technology have figured out how they want to utilize generative AI and LLMs in applying that towards capturing meeting notes. I think that's fantastic. But again, there's a lot of companies that are still figuring out what to do when I grow up.
I agree. I agree. I like to ask a question about mentorship because I think it's an important subject. I am sure that you mentored people, whether like on the analyst side or engineers. What is one of the misconceptions that young professionals have about working with data?
Wow. Okay. So let me get that straight, right? You're asking about the mentorship or the kind of challenges that I see young people are often misguided with data, right? Um, the fact that every problem can be solved with data is kind of like the misconception, right? I mean, I often tell my team, don't use a cannon to kill a mosquito, right? You don't have to over engineer anything. Sometimes building on a simple Excel sheet is good enough a solution. You don't have to build out like huge visualizations and huge models to do something. And at the end of the day, don't lose track of what we're trying to solve for. I think a lot of people sometimes forget, especially early on, or they get caught up using the bright, shiny objects so much that they often lose track of like what I'm actually trying to solve here and whether this is really needed or not is kind of like a question you have to constantly ask. I think staying focused in those and being disciplined in those areas goes a long way in accomplishing things and checking things off your list and moving on to the next one. I think that is where I feel people feel misguided that, oh, I have a lot of data. I can use data to solve all problems. And maybe in some cases it's true, but a lot of cases that doesn't necessarily hold true.
That's my experience is similar, that you get the really smart students coming out of college, really bright data scientists, machine learning engineers, and they want to swing for the fences. They see the mosquito, they want to roll out the cannons because they're excited to build. They're excited to apply their knowledge, or excited to apply their skills. But like you said, we don't want to lose sight of our objective. And one of the objectives is to reduce costs, but the bigger objective, or I would argue is bigger objective, is we're trying to change behavior and upstream improve their ability to make decisions. So if we're improving the executive team or our leaders' ability to make decisions, and all we need is the Excel sheet, then all we need is the Excel sheet, because it's not about how cool of a model we can build. It's about, are we improving their ability to make decisions? So that's definitely one. It's to sort of temper the expectations. Like, we're not always going to be reinventing the wheel. We're not always going to be building some models. Sometimes things are going to be very simple, very baseline, and very useful, and that's all that's going to be required. So yeah, I see that often. I've seen that often, and that is a great answer to an expectation to a young data professional is that expectation.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've realized that I've coached and level set expectations with young professionals is also that you're not always going to get the most exciting project to work on. Oftentimes, you're going to get some routine, mundane projects, but there is a lot of learnings in those too. And just because it is not a high visibility, high stakes, high impact project, it doesn't mean that it is any less important. It's an opportunity for one to try out different things, solidify their credibility, personal credibility within the organization, within the team. So there's multiple aspects that one should always look at. And early on in your career, you always want to like, hey, I want to be able to do X, Y, Z and showcase the huge impact that I'm having. That's great. And you will get those kind of opportunities, but those are far less to begin with. So when the time comes, let in your managers, in your organization, you be there as a front thought of mind person based on the solid work you've delivered on some of the routine kind of projects. I think to not be disheartened, not to feel discouraged, not to feel that, oh, this team is not giving me enough good projects to work on, let me jump ships, may not always be the right thing. So I think patience is a virtue. Anything else, and hunger is good, but balancing that with patience will yield really good results.
I noticed one thing added to the points that you guys mentioned is I keep telling young professionals I dealt with or coached that don't get married to your work or the model that you built. Like when a business decides like, okay, this is not the best way to do it, we have to change it. And some people just emotionally are just right now attached to the work they've been doing for like 2, 3, 6 months, 1 year. So how do you detach yourself from this? Like things change.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this is like, why let competition kill your product? Let you kill your own product by innovating and doing something. Same applies at work, right? I mean, you may have built attribution models. You can have, experimentation technology and methods, and there will always be something better. They'll always be, because the world keeps evolving, their environment keeps changing, and there will always be something better. So it's okay.
I
Nothing
agree.
lasts. Nothing lasts.
Since you work with data science team, what is like a corner of data science and machine learning that is underhyped, it needs some spotlight?
Basic statistics, man. At the end of the day, this is all statistics. So
I agree.
uh, when you think about AI, when you think about data science, when you think about LLMs, right, it's a combination of three things. One is definitely technology. The other one is your business acumen and your business domain knowledge, so that you know which kind of data to feed, which kind of problems to look at. And the third thing is statistics. Man, that is your instrument to actually do what you want to solve for. And in the hype of like, I don't need to know statistics. I can just ask, the generative AI to write me or tell me what that statistics is. Yeah, it can, and it can tell you do a good job. But knowing how to do it yourself is far more valuable, I feel, at least. So I honestly tell people, like, there are certain foundations you just need to have. And if you feel that, yeah, I have very basic understanding of statistics, but I want to be a rock star machine learning engineer, or I want to be a rock star data scientist, you have some ways to go to get there.
Yep. Great answer. I love that. I love the statistics answer. Absolutely. Bedrock. It's over 100 years of just rigorous foundation there in statistics, and most of the machine learning. It's all at the bottom is based off of these principles, and they sort of get overlooked because they're not so sexy. So I
Even
love
at
the
that
fact that,
point, I do want to add something. Right
yeah,
now, there was a time in mid 2010s, big data, right? Big data kind of
yeah,
like became like a huge thing, and trust me, it is huge. But when you look at it, what big data allows you to do is not a whole lot of things that is different. It's basically what you would do in a traditional data warehouse or in a data environment. The cost of doing that is what changed, right? Before, due to cost and compute restrictions or the monetary aspect attached to it, you would only house the data that you knew you needed and wanted to keep. Big data just let you open the box and say, hey, you have endless storage and you have endless compute, right? I think, but it didn't change the fact that at the end of the day, you still had to follow the principles of good data governance, good data quality, to create data management. And it's not something, it's people used to do this in 80s and 70s in housing data. It's obviously the space required to do that was huge. So it is the same thing, right? At the end of the day, underlying thing, it's the fundamentals that we are using is very much the same. It's how fast you can do it is what it has changed, right? The amount of resources that is required to do that is far different than what it was before.
yep, absolutely. The statistics is fundamental to all the fancy techniques now. It's fundamental. The data strategy is fundamental to all of the hype now.
Yeah.
And it never gets talked about, and it's a little bit overlooked because it's not the sexy, trendy topic, but it will be critical to any of the success in any of the enterprises if they're not, if those first principles aren't in place, those foundations. So on the search, so paid search. So
Mm.
marketing, you pay for keywords, you can buy your competitors' keywords, the whole keyword game to try to get your sponsored ads up to the top based on those keywords and all of that. And I would imagine that it's a big part of a marketing, maybe not a big part, but it's certainly a part of a marketing strategy. Bigger companies tend to seem to dominate because they have a little bit more resources. But with generative AI, so a lot of people are using generative AI for search. I use it even with Google. Google will show a Gemini output at the top. So in the future, let's just assume that LLMs are going to be more and more and more of the market share for search. More and more people are going to be using these types of models for search, for your bread and butter, like you said, like block and tackle or search. Now, again, against the small versus the big companies. Is this going to change or maybe level the playing field because the LLMs are more difficult? It's not obvious how you monetize the output of those distributions. So where would you put your thumb on the scale? If I'm a big company and I want to manipulate the search engines and I want my sort of ads up at the top, where am I putting my finger on the scale of the weights of the model? Is it in the pre-training? Is it in the post-training? Am I doing is it a part of like the chain of thought at inference time? Where am I manipulating that distribution so it shows my results at the top? I don't think it's obvious or clear. And do we even want to do that? or maybe the prompts are sort of understood with some other natural language process, and then ads are shown on the side. But my gut instincts, at least right now, is that it helps level the playing field to smaller companies where they can compete and search more, or maybe not. Maybe I have it all wrong, and not. Like, what do you think the future of paid search is now with the generative AI models?
I'll keep my answer restricted to paid search because I have a whole different opinion on natural search as well, right? I think for paid search, definitely, at least in the short run, it levels the playing field for smaller companies because again, big companies are investing in their own technologies for using generative AI to come up with answers, right? So while they're doing it and everybody's trying to figure out, here is an opportunity where smaller companies don't have to necessarily go there, but can feature more prominently in your generative AI results when that deep linking comes into play. I don't think it is there yet, but it is extremely, extremely hard to imagine that it won't be. See, at the end of the day, going back to fundamentals, marketing only exists where there are enough people there. So once you get the critical mass of people using generative AI on a day-to-day basis, that's when the companies are going to start figuring out, like, okay, now that we have X billion people doing these many searches every day and LLMs, how do we monetize that? Right? And think nobody has an answer to that just yet. But it is bound to happen. Like, I'll give you the example from like mobile days. The launch of mobile commerce, e-commerce, mobile commerce, right? M-commerce is what we used to call it at that time. There did not exist an ability to deep link a keyword from search into your mobile app directly. It would take you to a mobile web, right? So the ability to deep link into a mobile app, into a specific page, just did not exist. But as Google owned Android, guess what? Google also owned Google.com. So the search and the ability to deep link kind of followed, right? And I think we are going through that similar phase. We have Gemini, we have Bing, we have, OpenAI. All of these technologies are right now collecting critical mass. They want their platform to be the one where people are searching, where there is an audience. Once you have enough people get into their day-to-day habits of using it, right? That's when the companies are going to start thinking, okay, how do we start monetizing? And whether it is a sidebar of based on what you search for, we show you links, or whether those links are embedded, it's only a matter of time before we test out different things and see how those works. But I do think, yes, the world of search is going to evolve very rapidly. And I'm not just saying that based on my gut feeling. I'm seeing the evidence of it. When I'm old enough to remember that Google, when they started the search engine, right, it used to be natural search all along. Then they came in the paid search, and then natural search got demoted a little bit. If you see what's happening today, when you search for something, your first output is a Gemini output. And your paid search is now demoted underneath it. Just to, excuse me, if I have done enough analyses using this data to say that every position you're ranking, how much money does it actually cost you? It's huge because the eyeballs that are there at the top of the page versus at the middle versus at the bottom versus the next page is drastically different. How many times have people actually gone to the second, third, fourth page of a search results page? Very few, fraction. You're there on the first one. I'll take what I see in the top. I trust it. I trust technology, and I'll use that as an answer. Very rarely or very infrequently, you'll go to the second and the third results. But most cases, most audiences will take what is given to them in the top of the page, and then you use this, right? I'll give you my personal example. The other day, I was trying to figure out some tips and tricks in my iPhone that I wanted to change the setting. And I typed it in Google. The first response was literally a Gemini output based on the support documentation from Apple, right? So they don't even want you to go to the Apple support page. They're just summarizing that information and giving it to you from Gemini, right? And I scrolled down to look at it, and I could see the same steps being listed in the support pages of Apple's website, right? But it gave me exactly the step 3, 4, 5, do this, and you should be okay, right? And that's what I did. So again, when you look at what is happening in the world of search, where your generative AI output is prioritized above the paid links, which is the actual money generating machine for Google, these people are serious about what role generative AI is going to play in your lives. And they are willing to sacrifice those paid search keyword dollar amounts for that, at least in the short run.
Right. That's a
And
right.
that is a huge indication, right? Where the market and where the search is heading.
Right. It's very interesting. And like you said, Google's willing to sort of allow the Gemini to produce the results above the paid search, which helps, which sort of hurts some of their revenue, but also the companies. I think the big companies, so I don't know how much paid search contributes to their marketing sort of lift or return.
It's their
But I
I,
would
cash
imagine
cow.
it's
I can
some.
tell you it's huge.
It's
It's
huge.
by no meaning it's small. But again, it's not like a loss of revenue. So this is like a short term, long term. They might be willing to take, and again, this is my speculation. This is my understanding on how it works. It's like they're willing to take that hit in the short run because they don't want the customer, the user, to jump ships and go to a different platform to get a generative AI more direct response rather than scrolling through 5 links. They want you to be on their platform to be using their product. I think that's the long-term play, that they don't want to lose you as a user. And that's the investment that they're making in Gemini to
Right.
keep you on the platform.
And from the companies that are investing in getting their ads sponsored at the top. So in other words, from the company side of it, so the big maybe Fortune 20, Fortune 100 companies that really heavily sort of promote those sponsors, they would also be taking sort of a hit in terms of click through to their
Yeah.
websites or to their businesses. And then I wonder how long they'll accept this, or in other words, will they accept a world where they're no longer able to dominate due to the deep pockets, the search engine, because it's an LLM output, probability distributions. And we did a little test ourselves. We sort of tested sort of local businesses, or we tested, I believe it was, I forget the product we were searching, but we searched through the LLM and we looked for, like near me, what where are these particular, and we got a lot of shops I've never heard of showed up through the LLM on the map. We never heard of them. So like mom and pop type shops. Then we did the same thing into the traditional search engine, and it was of course heavily sponsored ads. So there was a difference. There's an absolute difference in my experience in the businesses that I saw when I went straight from the LLM versus sort of the traditional engine, which gave me heavy sponsored results. So I can't imagine the big businesses are going to be okay conceding this ground. And at some point, they're going to try to come in and push in and say, okay, where, like you mentioned, embedded links, like where are we able to start to put our links there, or our sponsorship ads there? And that's the part that I believe is uncertain. I don't have really an answer.
Yeah.
Really
I don't
have.
have an answer, but I do have an insight based on history, what has happened, right? Now, again, right? I remember a time where very similar to the mom and pop shops that is getting more prevalence and more prominence in today's environment. That's what used to happen for, natural search, that, the better content, when people used to search for, used to get prominence. And there were websites that were built specifically that didn't allow crawlers and bots on their sites. Those were getting like, and these were big companies who had the resources to say, hey, we're going to block crawlers, we're not going to allow bots on our site. Those were getting hurt, and obviously for them to even play catch up was like a huge deal. But with paid search, they got the opportunity to have a leg up. They say, okay, I can spend money rather than improving my SEO results. I bid for the keywords and be more prominent than the SEO, right? And I see something similar happening, right? That yes, the mom and pops shop results are going to be important for the companies like Google. I'm using Google more generic, but companies like Google to establish their credibility in front of the users that, yeah, you can trust us for the results that you see. And when we now form that habit of using and going to this one place for what we need, that's when they say, okay, now they're going to run some A/B test to say, okay, if we start replacing some of these results and promote like the paid ones, how much traffic do we get lost? How much click through do we get lost? And they're going to iterate and then figure out what the sweet spot is. So I think that's just a matter of time.
Right, I agree. I think Google, I always thought Google had an advantage with search from Gemini perspective because, okay, you have the whole entire index database. You have the entire internet already indexed. Now you're building your LLMs. So Google should have an advantage. If somehow search changes or somehow it's able to monetize it, I would think, over the other companies that aren't search engines. But I don't know. Maybe
No,
the whole
Google
thing
has
is.
definitely, I agree with you. Google has huge advantage. The place where they are playing catch up is the lead time, right? That somebody else, they were caught blindsided by LLMs, right? They are the second player in here. So somebody else has like a 2-year head start and they don't. I think that is where the catching up is happening. It's not that whether they have the information or not, it's how long you're taking to train the models. Right.
Honestly, my theory was that they weren't behind, but they were delaying it because their cash cow was making money, so they don't need to put LLMs or use generative AI. But then, yeah, I agree that like it's kind of panic or catch up. It's like right now we have to put generative AI out there. But honestly, like since I'm talking to tech people, yes, I believe LLMs are going to have a portion of search in general, but sometimes I just don't want to be very descriptive with my answers. I just want keyword search, get me my results, and come back. And the other side, I feel, is that uh, at least personally, I would still go to Google for anything product specific. Like yes, Q and A, I get it, generative AI gets it, etc. But once I want to see something visually, learn about something more, sometimes I just want to go to the source. I just don't want to have your add-on or whatever, like you generate your inference to understand it or learn more about it. So I think it's just gonna partition the types of search that can be used, and Google won't be the dominator anymore, I
Yeah.
guess.
These are all absolute valid observations and use cases, right? I mean, like there will always be a certain fraction of users who would want to see the underlying paper from which your LLM answer is generated. But there are going to be people sometimes, like I'll give you an example. Right? We are planning a trip to a place that we've never been before. And we ask one of the LLM, GPTs to, hey, create a 4 5 day itinerary focused on XYZ, not including so and so, like being very descriptive. And it literally gave us a very nice itinerary, which we felt, yeah, we can literally take this and just do exactly what it is asking us to do. Right. And it cut down our trip planning session from like days and weeks of, scrolling through many things to very specific. Now, granted, these are activities. Now, think about translating that again. Me being at Expedia is such a huge part of my life, right? And I'm trying to think that okay, if I want to do the exact same thing for a hotel, that hey, I want to be now in this itinerary. My follow up question is, hey, help me choose a hotel that is allows me to do all of these sightseeing but without having to take transportation or with being within x minutes of ride from these places, right? It will tell me today based on natural learning that here are the hotels. But now you have the opportunity for a company like Expedia to say, hey, if you want to promote the Marriotts and the Hyatts in this location, insert us, right? That is a real use case that can actually happen. So there's a lot of the way we know the world is definitely changed. How much and how quickly is what we are all waiting and experiencing day to day. So yeah. So search, natural or paid, is going to be very different than what we've come to learn and know about today.
Absolutely.
I had a question. I mean, it's the same subject, but the search engine optimization. It's been like a whole business by itself, right, for a very long while. So right now with LLMs, now is it an addition that you need now content or search engine optimization for large language models so you can be ready for those LLM driven search engines? Or we can say that the game is over for dedicated search engine optimization companies.
I am inclined to say that it's close to game over. If you think about, again, going to where today generative AI results get prioritized, then comes paid search. Natural search is on page number 2.
I agree.
Think about how many times you're going to go there. And for a common user, right, who has limited amount of time, they don't want to comb through 4 or 5 different links of SEO to figure out the answer to whatever that they're looking for. If all of that gets summarized and put into one place, uh, that's a much easier way to grasp it in a much shorter time, right? And I feel that factor alone, because literally what generative AI is doing is what we've been doing using SEO. We would research, right, 4 or 5 different things. We would pick which one we want, and we would then summarize whatever is it that we are trying to learn, understand. If all of that is happening to us, somebody else is doing it and putting it to in a concise form. Hey, don't worry about going to these places. By the way, here it is. I am hard pressed to figure out why would anybody choose the longer route, and why would not somebody just take the information once you have enough credibility and validity in there built in, right? If you think about what we've used SEO for all this while, is not to buy e-commerce things, is to learn something about something, or learn a method, learn something to increase our knowledge about something. And if that is getting summarized and put it in front of you in a concise manner, that's 90% of the people are going to take that.
I agree.
So I feel the companies that have built on optimizing SEO links for other companies and things like that, I think they are in a much more precarious position than, with this disruption, and they need to figure out a new way to reinvent themselves.
Right, the business model. So I remember in the early days, like you mentioned, the early days of search, there's all different ways to game the search engine. It was sort of like the Wild West in those early days. Like you could manipulate the backlinks by sending backlinks to your page, and you could do all. And then Google rolled out those algorithms that sort of started the Panda and Penguin, I think, were names of those original algorithms to stop gaming their search engines. That goes back quite some time. But I wonder now. So the LLMs are training on the internet. And generally, the weights get distributed in ways where the more it sees something, it might have a higher weight. In other words, a higher distribution. And we see this with coding. Oftentimes, if you ask for a search, sort of a search script, it'll show a brute force solution, which is not an ideal search solution, but it'll oftentimes show that because it's seen so many of these examples all over the internet. And I wonder if, like, one of the hacky ways to game the LLM would be produce as much content on the internet as you can. So when it trains it, it's just seeing so much content about your thing, and the weights are then distributed maybe in your favor. And now we're right back to like the beginning of like how we hacked the Google search engines, where now we're trying to manipulate the LMs and the open internet.
That is exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, there is a methodology, right? If you can reverse engineer and say, how can I insert myself in that methodology, then you can literally get the output that you want, right? How difficult it is to now make that happen, how difficult it is to not make that happen, is the question of, is a tug of war between one side who wants to benefit out of it and the other side who wants to restrict that behavior, right? So that's at the end of the day is how it's going to play out. I mean, we've seen this in social media. We've seen this in search itself, right? Everything that's on the internet has gone through this, right? And this is no different. Think about disinformation as well, right? I mean, you can put enough disinformation about something, and that gets maybe picked up, and maybe that's what gets highlighted about something that we may not be fully aware and know of, and that's how our thinking gets formulated. So there's got a lot of tricky parts to navigate, and now how you consume this information that is just presented to you, and in the interest of time, you don't want to spend time to validate and take it at face value, right? So there is a lot of change that one has to adapt, for users at least, right? And how we are consuming this information, and how it's going to be different from all these years that we've been consuming the same information.
Absolutely.
I had a question, Ameya, about you mentioned that you were working with a startup lately. So if you had a founder and you're mentoring him or coaching him, and he wants to use data the proper way in his startup, and you have a whiteboard in 10 minutes, what would you sketch for him to tell him, like, this is how you start?
I would start with, what is the impact? What is the most important thing or what is the most important problem that he's trying to solve in this particular point in time? And based on that end solution, whether it can be first solved with data or not, or how much data do you need to solve it, is how I would reverse thing. I would not start with, hey, here is all the things we can do, and now go figure out a way. And the reason, and I, having been in that environment, I'll tell you, what is important in a startup environment is the speed. Speed is extremely important. You're not looking to build something that's going to stand the test of time 10, 20 years from now. You want to be in the environment, you want to be in the front right now, in the near short term, so that you can rebuild this at a later point in time, when you have more resources, and when you're much more established at that point in time. So the dynamics on how data is used in a startup kind of an environment versus a more mature organization is very different, right?
It's not feasible.
It's
Agreed.
not. The opportunity cost for that is much, much higher in a startup environment than in a more mature organization.
I agree. We do a rapid fire section, Amia. It's just supposed to be like snappy, quick answers and fun, more fun. Our rapid fire round is, you've got one tool for the next year: Python, SQL, or a magical AI intern. What's your pick?
Python.
Python?
And
Awesome.
the reason is because that's more foundational than anything. The magical AI can do something based on what Python can do.
Makes sense. This one I'm going to ask you, and you tell me if it's possible to answer. Biggest Hollywood title where the
Uh,
data surprised you in a good or a bad way?
the part that surprised me while I was at Discovery was how much does it cost to make, I wouldn't say non-scripted content versus scripted content, right? And the comparison is like, Discovery owns a lot of unscripted content like Food Network, HGTV, right? Versus HBO owns like Games of Thrones and like, House of Dragons. And the budget between those two, oh my God, it is
The gap is
unimaginably
huge.
different. Yes. So yes, that
That's an
was a
interesting
aha moment
insight.
for me. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and the
What's
fact
Yeah,
fact that during COVID you could still shoot these unscripted shows because we literally Discovery sent like camera equipment to people's homes to do like cooking shows for Food Network, which you couldn't do for Game of Thrones, where you had to be on location. And how do you get that in a time of lockdown? And you have all these social distancing norms that you have to follow and all those kind of things. So again, right, it goes to show how the industry get impacted. The same industry get impacted by the same rules, but in so different ways.
interesting. What's more frustrating, dirty data or conflicting stakeholder opinions?
That's a very tough one to answer, right? What is being a data person? I feel dirty data frustrates me more. I think the people having different opinions somehow manageable. Dirty data is a little bit more closer to heart than anything else.
Favorite analogy you use to explain data to non technical folks?
Data is like going to a gym. Okay, you don't go to the gym one day, you are not going to die the next day. You don't go to the gym for 2 years, you're going to shorten your lifespan. That's data, right? You don't do good data analytics for like 1 quarter, you cut budgets, you'll survive, you'll be okay in your business. You implement that as a culture and you don't do it at all for like years together, your business will die shorter, quicker.
Makes sense. First reaction when someone says, "Can we just use ChatGPT for this?"
Sure, go ahead.
Good answer. Try it out.
Yeah.
You've been
It's like
given
measure
1 hour.
twice,
Yeah, go
cut
ahead.
once,
Sorry.
right? This is where you measure once, cut twice, kind of a story.
Let's see. All right. Your proudest data win that no one outside your team ever noticed.
I don't know whether I can say whether nobody noticed or not because I make a big deal out of it anyways. I think the proudest moment for me was at Expedia when I built like the Expedia's attribution model back in 2008, 2009, where not a lot of people, including myself, knew how big of an impact this is going to have. But it did end up having a huge, huge impact, and it was adopted across the organization. I feel extremely proud about.
One more question. What's your go to data visualization pet peeve? Bonus if it involves a pie chart.
Pet peeve on visualization. So where do I start? There is so many. I mean, like I look at data. The biggest pet peeve is when I don't see the source for any data and the methodology, kind of a description how it is done, right? When somebody says, "Oh, this went up by 20%," as compared to what? Yourself, this period, competition, what? Right? So when these kind of like visualizations or charts get shown, I always like to have some context. And when I don't see the source, I don't see a brief description. It just feels like I'm not even going to bother looking at this. It means nothing.
All right. My last one is one tech buzzword you would like to permanently retire. All
To
right.
give you an
One app.
example,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
said synergy. That term
Synergy.
synergy. It's not really a tech, but it's sort of like a corporate word. That's
Yeah. But there are quite a few, and the best one, right? Data lake. Oh, that is just for me is a meaningless thing. Yeah, you data is data. Whether it's a data warehouse, data lake house. Oh, that's an even
the
better
new
one.
one. Yeah, that's the new one.
What the hell is that?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
that was one of the best speed rounds.
Okay.
Like he was the
Yeah.
fastest response.
The
Like
snappiest so far.
snappiest response, speed round, really good answers. I love the data visualization answer about like having the context there. Like that was a great. That's a sort of a mistake that a lot of entry level data analysts, maybe sometimes even senior level, they forget to add the context of what the heck are we even looking at or comparing to.
I have a last one. So, more fun to solve marketing attribution or product churn?
Oh, wow. More fun to solve. Man, it's difficult. I'll take both. There's both such amazing problems to solve, and there's so many underlying things. I honestly, in this case, I would say I want both. Like, it's like a kid going to say, "You want chocolate or strawberry?" And I say, "I want both flavors." That's me for this problem.
Yeah, you need
That's pretty
both.
awesome. I think that rapid fire round usually like just gets people going. Like it's fun. Like it's
Yeah,
supposed to be
yeah,
supposed to be fun. Some we had guests like they started overthinking. They were trying to explain themselves. It's like just enjoy it. Like it's fun. Yeah, honestly, like right now, not the words that like bothering me, but I think like trying to defend some of the founders and startups, and then some of the concepts. One is, oh yeah, your startup is just a wrapper around OpenAI or something. It's like, but for anybody who worked in engineering, everything's a wrapper. It's just like layers on top of layers on top of layers. So that claims like seems coming from non-tech people that just like throwing it to bash those startups and the people that are trying to actually make benefit of the trend. Like it's
Yeah,
a fair game. Like they're trying to make benefit of the trend. And
yeah.
the second one is I was telling Ryan, like I hate the fact that it's become a negative to talk about vibe coding because
Hmm.
if they're talking about like the idea of like you're talking to an LLM and you're just generating code, which I feel like vibe coding should be a positive one. Like if you're a senior or someone who has experience, talking to LLM while you're actually building an application is very useful.
Yeah,
Like because you are the guardrail, it's
yeah,
not going to your application before it's bulletproof and you
yeah,
see what's happening. And people looking at it as negative, which I get it because there's a lot of low code tools right now and no code tools that are just making that bad reputation or
yeah.
getting these concepts bad.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely true, right? It's the drawing the distinction between what it is being used for, whether it is used to solidify your work that you're doing in progress, or whether you're trying to replace it to saying, "Hey, I don't want to code. I just want to use the snippet that I get from whatever tool is being given and try to use that for." So I think that is a little bit blurry in how people one may have a different point of view on this one from like where they are looking at it, but the other one might be thinking completely different. So I totally see where the positive negatives comes in.
Yeah, and it comes with experience. Like I lower my guard if I'm like building a script that I know I'm gonna run a couple of times and get rid of it.
Yeah.
I'm willing to accept anything from the LLM. It's just like run it for me. Like I don't care as long as it does the work. But for running production, definitely.
Yeah, so even like same for me. Like I write SQL quite extensively to like just play around with the data to see what we have, and I don't care about how optimized that query is because that's not the one that's going to go into production and to create ETLs, right? That's somebody else who's going to do it. That's I'll be a bad coder from that perspective, but it gets the job done. I don't have to wait for somebody else to give me data. I can self-serve, get what I want, experiment with what I want, and see something is feasible or technically possible or not.
absolutely.
I agree. We actually had a discussion about Query GPT. It's supposed to be a paper from Uber regarding like how they broke down like an agentic approach to get from natural language to actually SQL that makes sense for your data set.
There are companies who is doing this. In fact, we at Expedia in one of the hackathons tried to do it. So because at the end of the day, so we tried to do some Slack integration to say, hey, today when our executives ask for data, they're asking somebody to say, hey, I want to know how many sales happened compared to this time. So like very basic questions, right, about information. It's just sitting there somewhere. Maybe the cut that they want is not available, but it's there, right? Can we create something on the fly that way you can ask Slack in natural language? And this is, trust me, this is 2016 that we're trying this, um, that we can ask in Slack and get some output. And we were able to demonstrate that, but it had a very limited use cases. You could only ask these many questions. Your spelling had to be absolutely right. You cannot call sales something else, or so it kind of was not very refined. But we tried that, and I felt that that has got a huge potential because today just getting basic information becomes a bottleneck based on availability of some data analyst or somebody else, which doesn't have to be.
I agree. Well, Amia, I enjoyed the conversation.
Same
And
here. I know we are up 2 hours, and I did not even
Yep.
realize that we spent
Yep.
2 hours.
Yep. Really nice, fluid conversation. Really great topics. You had some really great points, great stories.
But it was really great talking to you, and really appreciate. Thank you for this
no,
opportunity.
I really appreciate it. I mean, we learned a lot, and thank you. Between mentorship, architecture, people, team, executive presence, etc., we put a full circle on
Yep.
what you do in your experience.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you.
Thanks for welcoming me and making me feel relaxed and having this conversation.
Yep.
Really appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank
Really
you so
appreciate your
much.
time. Thank you, man. It was awesome.
You have guys
Have a
have a
great
good
day.
day. Bye.
Yep. Take care.
You too. Bye bye.
For Rabea Innovations.